What if I told you that one law could quietly push millions of people into fear without most Americans even noticing? In Florida, a sweeping new immigration crackdown is already doing just that. Over 1 million undocumented immigrants live in the state, powering farms, building homes, caring for children, and keeping businesses running. But under Florida's new laws, something as ordinary as driving to work, visiting a hospital, or accepting a ride from a friend could suddenly carry life-changing consequences. Employers are bracing for worker shortages, hospitals are seeing fear replace trust, and entire families are beginning to disappear from communities overnight. This isn't just about immigration, it's about Florida's economy, public safety, and everyday life. The most shocking part? These laws don't stop at undocumented immigrants. They ripple outward, affecting citizens, small business owners, teachers, nurses, and anyone who calls Florida home. So what exactly changed, and how could it change the state forever? Stay with me, because the next few minutes might completely shift how you see Florida's future. Number 10. Mandatory law enforcement cooperation. One of the most controversial and far-reaching parts of Florida's new immigration law is mandatory law enforcement cooperation with federal immigration authorities. On paper, it sounds simple. Local police and sheriffs must work more closely with immigration enforcement. But in real life, this changes how people experience safety itself. Under this rule, routine police encounters, like traffic stops, noise complaints, or asking for help, can now carry immigration consequences. For many families, that creates a powerful sense of fear that goes far beyond politics. Research from multiple states shows a clear pattern. When local police are tied to immigration enforcement, crime reporting drops. Victims of domestic violence, wage theft, or even assault may hesitate to call 911, worried that helping themselves could put a loved one at risk. This doesn't make communities safer, it makes crimes more invisible. And when crimes go unreported, offenders stay free, and neighborhoods become less secure for everyone, including U.S. citizens. Police departments also feel the strain. Officers are trained to build trust, not fear. When community members avoid law enforcement, investigations become harder, witnesses disappear, and public safety weakens from the inside out. Even police chiefs across the country have warned that these policies can turn everyday policing into a trust crisis. The long-term effect is subtle but dangerous. A state where people stay silent instead of seeking help, where fear replaces cooperation, and where safety becomes unevenly distributed based on immigration status, even though crime does not work that way. If this issue concerns you, don't stay silent. Like this video to help others see the full picture, subscribe for more clear, research-backed breakdowns, and comment below, do these laws make communities safer or more divided? Your voice matters more than you think. Number 9. Expanded definition of human smuggling. Florida's new immigration law dramatically expands the definition of human smuggling, and this is where fear begins to blur the line between serious crime and everyday human behavior. Traditionally, human smuggling referred to organized operations that profit from transporting people across borders. But under the new definition, intent and profit matter far less, while simple actions can suddenly carry severe criminal penalties. This shift creates confusion, anxiety, and legal uncertainty for ordinary people who never imagine themselves at risk. Imagine giving a ride to a coworker, helping a family member get to a doctor's appointment, or driving church members to a community event. Under this law, those routine acts could be scrutinized, questioned, or even criminalized if the passenger is undocumented. Legal experts warn that the broad wording opens the door to over-enforcement, where discretion, not clear rules, determines outcomes. That unpredictability is what makes the law especially powerful and dangerous. Research on similar policies shows that when laws are vague and expansive, people begin to withdraw from community life. Neighbors stop helping neighbors, faith groups cancel outreach programs, families isolate themselves to avoid risk. The result isn't less smuggling, it's less trust, less cooperation, and more fear woven into everyday decisions. Even U.S. citizens may hesitate to assist others, worried that compassion could be misinterpreted as criminal intent. The emotional toll is just as significant. Communities built on shared support suddenly feel fragile. Acts of kindness become calculated risks. And while the law claims to target traffickers, its real impact may fall hardest on working families, mixed-status households, and the very networks that keep communities functioning. In redefining human smuggling, Florida hasn't just expanded a legal term, it has expanded fear into daily life. Number 8. Restrictions on state aid and benefits. Florida's new immigration law places strict limits on access to state aid and public benefits, a move that may sound targeted but carries far-reaching consequences for entire communities. While supporters argue this prevents misuse of resources, research consistently shows that most undocumented immigrants already do not qualify for major public benefits. What changes now is the climate of fear and exclusion, where families avoid essential services even when they are legally eligible. The most immediate impact falls on children, especially those in mixed-status households. Many of these children are U.S. citizens, yet their parents may hesitate to apply for food assistance, housing help, or educational programs out of fear that interacting with state agencies could expose their family to scrutiny. Studies show that when families withdraw from support systems, rates of food insecurity, housing instability, and child stress rise sharply. These effects don't stop at one household, they ripple through schools, healthcare systems, and neighborhoods. From an economic perspective, restricting aid can actually cost the state more in the long run. Preventative services like nutrition support, early education, and basic health care are far cheaper than emergency interventions. When people delay care or support, minor issues turn into crises, overwhelming hospitals, shelters, and social services. Public health researchers warn that excluding groups from aid creates hidden vulnerabilities that eventually affect everyone. There's also a psychological toll. Communities begin to feel divided into who deserves help and who doesn't. Trust in institutions erodes. People stop asking for assistance, even when they are entitled to it. The result is a quieter but deeper damage. Families struggling in silence, children falling behind, and neighborhoods absorbing stress that could have been prevented. By restricting state aid and benefits, Florida isn't just tightening eligibility rules, it's reshaping who feels safe enough to seek help, and that shift may define the state's social fabric for years to come. Number 7. Enhanced penalties for ID fraud. Another major pillar of Florida's new immigration law is the introduction of enhanced penalties for ID fraud, a measure that may sound reasonable on the surface but carries deep and uneven consequences beneath it. The law significantly increases criminal penalties for using false or borrowed identification, even in situations where the intent is not malicious but purely survival-driven. For many undocumented workers, an ID is not about deception, it's about being able to work, rent a home, or provide for family. Research in labor and migration studies shows that undocumented immigrants often turn to false documents because legal pathways to work are limited or inaccessible, not because they intend to commit broader crimes. By escalating penalties, Florida is shifting these actions from civil violations into serious criminal offenses, exposing people to jail time, permanent records, and long-term consequences that extend far beyond immigration status. This creates a system where economic participation itself becomes a legal risk. The ripple effects don't stop with workers. Employers may face sudden labor shortages as employees disappear from work sites out of fear. Entire industries, like construction, hospitality, and agriculture, depend on workers who may now feel forced into the shadows. When fear replaces stability, productivity drops, costs rise, and informal labor becomes more common, increasing exploitation rather than preventing it. There's also a social cost. Enhanced penalties discourage people from interacting with banks, schools, and even emergency services, all of which require identification. Communities become more fragmented, and everyday life becomes a maze of legal danger. Even citizens in mixed-status families may feel the impact, as one member's mistake can destabilize an entire household. By intensifying penalties for ID fraud, Florida isn't just punishing document misuse, it's criminalizing survival strategies, pushing vulnerable workers further underground, and reshaping the workforce in ways that could quietly destabilize the state's economy and communities. Number 6. Local government compliance mandates. Florida's new immigration law also forces local governments to fully comply with state-level immigration enforcement rules, removing much of their ability to respond to the unique needs of their own communities. Cities and counties that once had flexibility in how they worked with immigrant populations are now required to follow uniform mandates regardless of local conditions, public safety concerns, or economic realities. This shift represents a major loss of local control, and its effects are already being felt. Local governments are often the first to see the real-world consequences of policy. They manage police departments, public schools, emergency services, and community programs. When the state mandates strict compliance, local leaders lose the ability to balance enforcement with community trust. Research in public administration shows that policies imposed without local discretion often lead to inefficiency, confusion, and strained public services. What works in one county may be harmful in another, but the law leaves no room for adjustment. The impact on community relationships is especially serious. Local officials and law enforcement officers frequently rely on cooperation from residents to solve crimes, manage emergencies, and provide services. When residents fear that any interaction with local government could trigger immigration consequences, engagement drops. People avoid town halls, school meetings, public clinics, and even disaster shelters. This weakens the social fabric that local governments depend on to function effectively. There are also financial consequences. Counties and cities may face increased administrative costs to ensure compliance, diverting resources from infrastructure, education, and public health. Smaller municipalities in particular may struggle to meet state requirements without additional funding, creating budget pressure and service cuts. By enforcing strict local government compliance, Florida isn't just standardizing immigration policy, it's reshaping how communities govern themselves. The result is a quieter but profound transformation. Local leaders constrained, residents disengaged, and communities left with fewer tools to respond to their own realities. Number 5. Hospital immigration status reporting. One of the most alarming elements of Florida's new immigration law is the requirement for hospitals to collect and report patients' immigration status during medical visits. While officials argue this is about tracking costs, public health experts warn that it creates a dangerous barrier to care. When people fear that seeking medical help could expose them or their family to immigration scrutiny, many simply stop going to the hospital, even in emergencies. Research in public health consistently shows that fear-based policies lead to delayed treatment, untreated chronic illnesses, and higher mortality rates. People avoid prenatal care, skip cancer screenings, and wait until conditions become unbearable before seeking help. By the time they arrive at emergency rooms, illnesses are often more severe and more expensive to treat. This doesn't save money, it shifts costs into crisis care, which hospitals and taxpayers ultimately absorb. The impact extends beyond immigrant communities. Hospitals operate as interconnected systems. When emergency rooms become overwhelmed with late-stage cases, wait times increase for everyone. Disease prevention suffers too. Public health officials stress that when communities avoid health care, infectious diseases spread more easily, making the entire population more vulnerable. Health crises do not check immigration status before moving through a community. There is also a deep ethical concern. Hospitals have long been seen as safe spaces, places where care comes before paperwork. requiring immigration questions at intake changes that perception overnight. Patients may withhold information, lie about symptoms, or avoid follow-up care, undermining medical accuracy and trust between doctors and patients. The emotional toll is profound. Families face impossible choices between health and safety. Parents delay care for sick children. Elderly patients suffer in silence. In attempting to gather data, Florida risks breaking one of the most essential foundations of public health: trust. By tying healthcare access to immigration status, this law doesn't just collect information, it reshapes who feels safe enough to seek care, with consequences that could echo far beyond hospital walls. Number 4. Increased funding for immigration enforcement. Florida's new immigration law also pours millions of dollars into expanded immigration enforcement, dramatically increasing the reach and visibility of state-backed crackdowns. Supporters frame this as a commitment to law and order, but critics argue it comes with a hidden price tag, one that affects priorities far beyond immigration itself. Every dollar redirected toward enforcement is a dollar not spent on schools, healthcare, infrastructure, or disaster preparedness in a state already facing rising costs and climate risks. Research on public spending shows that aggressive enforcement strategies often deliver diminishing returns. Increased funding leads to more checkpoints, more detentions, and more administrative costs, but not necessarily better long-term outcomes. What it does reliably produce is fear-driven behavior. Workers leave job sites, families relocate overnight, and entire neighborhoods experience sudden population drops. These shifts disrupt local economies, especially in industries like agriculture, construction, and hospitality that rely on stable labor forces. There's also an efficiency problem. Immigration enforcement is complex, paperwork-heavy, and resource-intensive. As funding expands, so does the system's footprint. More facilities, more personnel, more coordination between agencies. Studies from other states suggest that these expansions can overwhelm courts and detention centers, creating backlogs that slow the very system they aim to strengthen. Enforcement becomes louder, not smarter. The social cost is harder to measure, but just as real. Communities begin to feel watched rather than protected. Public spaces empty. Parents keep children home. Trust between residents and government erodes, replaced by anxiety and uncertainty. Even people with legal status may feel targeted, especially in mixed-status households where one enforcement action can destabilize an entire family. By increasing funding for immigration enforcement, Florida is making a clear statement about its priorities. The question is whether this investment leads to long-term stability or whether it quietly drains resources while deepening fear, disruption, and division across the state. Number 3. Invalidating out-of-state driver's licenses. Florida's decision to invalidate certain out-of-state driver's licenses marks another turning point where immigration policy spills directly into everyday life. Under this law, licenses issued to undocumented immigrants by other states are no longer recognized as valid in Florida. On the surface, this may seem like a technical legal adjustment, but in reality, it turns driving into a daily risk for thousands of people who rely on their cars to survive. Driving is not a luxury in Florida, it's a necessity. Many areas lack reliable public transportation, and people depend on cars to get to work, school, grocery stores, and medical appointments. When valid licenses from other states suddenly become invalid, individuals are forced into an impossible choice: stop driving and lose income, or keep driving and risk arrest, fines, or detention. Research in transportation safety shows that policies like this often lead to more unlicensed and uninsured drivers on the road, making conditions less safe for everyone. There are also serious economic consequences. Workers who can't legally drive may lose jobs overnight, especially in industries that require commuting to job sites, such as construction, cleaning services, and home healthcare. Small businesses feel the strain as employees disappear or become unreliable, not due to lack of skill, but fear of a traffic stop. Public safety experts warn that this law may discourage people from reporting accidents or cooperating with police after minor crashes, worried that a routine interaction could escalate. That hesitation increases hit-and-run incidents and complicates insurance claims, raising costs for all drivers. Beyond logistics, the emotional toll is heavy. Families plan routes to avoid police presence. Parents fear school drop-offs. Everyday errands become stressful calculations. By invalidating out-of-state licenses, Florida isn't just enforcing a rule, it's turning mobility into a source of fear, reshaping how people move, work, and live across the state. Number 2. Criminal penalties for transporting undocumented immigrants. Florida's new immigration law introduces criminal penalties for transporting undocumented immigrants, a provision that reaches deep into everyday life and turns ordinary actions into potential legal risks. What once counted as routine, giving someone a ride to work, helping a neighbor get to a doctor's appointment, or driving a family member to the grocery store, can now carry serious criminal consequences. The law doesn't just target organized trafficking, it casts a wide net that captures ordinary people acting out of necessity or compassion. Legal experts warn that the language of the law is broad enough to create constant uncertainty. Intent is difficult to prove, and enforcement may depend heavily on discretion. That means two identical actions, like giving a coworker a ride, could result in completely different outcomes depending on who is stopped, where, and by whom. This unpredictability fuels fear, especially in mixed-status families, where one person's vulnerability can endanger everyone else. Research on similar laws shows that criminalizing transportation leads to social isolation. People stop carpooling, churches cancel outreach programs, employers struggle to coordinate rides for workers. Families become fragmented as members avoid traveling together. The very networks that help communities survive, shared transportation, mutual aid, informal support, begin to collapse under legal pressure. The public safety implications are also significant. When people fear legal consequences for helping others, emergencies become more dangerous. Delayed medical care, missed work, and reduced access to essential services follow. Ironically, laws designed to enforce order can create more instability, not less. Perhaps the most lasting impact is psychological. Communities begin to see kindness as a liability. Trust erodes. Everyday decisions are filtered through fear instead of need. By criminalizing transportation, Florida isn't just regulating movement, it's reshaping how people relate to one another, turning simple human assistance into a calculated legal risk with consequences that extend far beyond immigration enforcement. Number 1. Mandatory E-Verify for employers. At the center of Florida's new immigration law is mandatory E-Verify for employers, a policy that directly reshapes the state's workforce. E-Verify is a federal system used to confirm whether employees are legally authorized to work in the U.S. While it has existed for years, Florida's law expands its use and tightens penalties for non-compliance, placing heavy pressure on businesses across the state. What sounds like a straightforward verification process quickly becomes a high-stakes decision for employers and workers alike. Research on mandatory E-Verify programs in other states shows a consistent pattern. Labor shortages increase, especially in industries that rely on immigrant workers. Agriculture, construction, hospitality, elder care, and food services are among the hardest hit. When workers disappear, either because they fail verification or fear the system altogether, projects stall, crops go unharvested, and service quality declines. These losses don't stay isolated. They ripple outward through supply chains, prices, and local economies. Small businesses face unique risks. Unlike large corporations, many lack dedicated HR departments or legal teams. A single paperwork mistake can lead to fines, audits, or business closures. Some employers respond by reducing hiring altogether, while others shift work into informal arrangements, increasing exploitation rather than preventing it. Studies suggest that strict verification laws often push workers further underground, where labor protections are weaker and abuse is more common. There's also a human cost. Families lose income overnight. Workers who have lived in Florida for years suddenly vanish from job sites. Communities experience quiet disruptions as people relocate to states with looser enforcement. Even U.S. citizens can be affected when workplaces shrink or shut down due to staffing shortages. By mandating E-Verify statewide, Florida isn't just checking employment eligibility, it's reshaping its labor market, testing the balance between enforcement and economic reality, and setting in motion changes that may permanently alter how the state works, builds, and grows. Florida's new immigration laws are more than a political headline. They're a turning point that could redefine the state's economy, safety, and sense of community. When fear reaches workplaces, hospitals, roads, and neighborhoods, the impact doesn't stay contained, it spreads. What happens next depends on awareness, dialogue, and action. If this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, like this video to help it reach more people, subscribe for clear research-backed explainers, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think these laws will shape Florida's future? Your perspective matters, and this conversation is only just beginning.